Muy buenos días. Bienvenidos a las plenarias de Organización y Comportamiento en la Empresa. Yo soy Gonzalo Valdés, soy profesor de la sección 1 del curso. Como saben, estas son las plenarias donde se reúnen todos los estudiantes de las 3 secciones. Entonces, hoy día tenemos un invitado internacional, justamente. Su nombre es Hatim Rahman, o Rahman, I would say in English. Hatim es profesor de Northwestern University, pero les voy a explicar un poco su trayectoria. Él estudió en la Universidad de Illinois, en Urbana-Champaign. Tiene un major en Business Process Management, que es como que hubiera, parecido al que fuera Industrial TI, algo así. Se estudió gestión de operaciones, management en la Universidad de Illinois, y después se fue a hacer un Master of Science en el departamento Management Science and Engineering de Stanford University. Luego de hacer ese máster empezó a buscar oportunidades de hacer investigación y finalmente logró entrar al doctorado en el mismo departamento. Entonces se doctoró en ese programa y se fue a trabajar después de profesor inmediatamente a la Universidad de Northwestern en Chicago. Y ahí trabaja en el Kellogg School of Management, es profesor con una completa de planta y ha recibido varios premios, o sea, tiene publicaciones en varias de las mejores revistas. Y, por ejemplo, tiene un premio que es bien conocido en Estados Unidos, una revista que se llama Poets and Quants, que premia a los 40 pensadores de management a nivel mundial. Los premia todo el año y él estuvo en la lista este año de los 40 grandes pensadores de management. Entonces, de verdad que es una persona que es realmente un lujo tenerlo haciendo una clase en un curso, porque es reconocido a nivel mundial. Do you get what I'm saying? Anything? Or no?
Más o menos,
Okay,
más o menos.
Lo otro es que Hatim va a hacer la charla en inglés. Yo le pedí que la hiciera, que hablara un poco más pausado, pero está todo el material en las diapositivas y él, digamos, cualquier pregunta que tienen la pueden hacer. So, without further ado, let me introduce you. I give you Hatim Rahman. Le damos un aplauso, por favor, para comenzar.
Muchas gracias. Hola, ¿cómo están? Sí, me llamo Hatim. Puedo hablar en español un poco, pero lo siento, necesito hablar en inglés for today's lecture. So we'll go ahead and get started. As Gonzalo mentioned, my research and teaching has focused on artificial intelligence, new technology more broadly. The reason I'm honored and excited to speak here with you is because a lot of the discussion, especially in the media, is not very good. So let me get started to show you some examples. So you will often see news clippings like this. Artificial intelligence or inteligente de artificial will affect 40% of jobs and probably worsen inequality. A few years earlier,
Maybe closer to the... I think it's off.
So many esteemed organizations said that up to half or a third to one half of the jobs will be replaced by automation. But as a researcher, it's important to investigate these claims more closely. So just to get started, I want to just see a raise of hands. How many jobs in the United States have been replaced by automation since 1950? So just to make it easier, how many of you think it's A or B? So due to automation. So between 5 and 10%, more than about 0 to 10%. Okay? And I know the rest of you think, but just so we can see the number of people in the class, So if you think it's C or D, raise your hand. Right? Do you want to guess, Professor Valdez? Are you in the A-B camp or C-D? A-B. So it turns out that just one of the close to 270 jobs listed in the 1950 census has been replaced by new technology or automation. It turns out it was an elevator operator. Although my teaching assistant this year said he saw an elevator operator in Chicago. So I may have to revise this slide as well. This broadly actually shows, if you look at the aggregate data, again, this is the United States, but the similar trends exist in many countries, especially developed and developing countries, that the total number of jobs in the economy has significantly increased. The main question and thought is, what are the composition of the jobs? What are the nature of the jobs? So the way we're teaching today is not the same as 1950, right? Most likely they weren't using slides, we were using chalkboard, a blackboard with chalk. So again, I think the more interesting and important question, especially with artificial intelligence, is how is the nature of work going to change, and potentially what jobs are going to be more or less in demand. We're very unlikely to see complete replacement of entire jobs. And you know, going back here for a second, this data encompasses the internet, personal computers, so on and so forth. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time telling you a little bit more about what I think is one of the most useful frameworks to help understand how AI is going to affect jobs, but I'll get there in a second. So, so the framework that I'm going to present is called bounded automation. I know Professor Valdez and Professor Leatherby talked about bounded rationality earlier this week, but I'm going to build on that a little bit and present to you inspired by that concept called bounded automation. And so based on the motivation that I said, instead of thinking about how have jobs been replaced by technology, the central question of this is, why does work and jobs appear to be thriving, right? Again, the idea is that we're actually seeing an increase in the number of jobs overall in the economy. So this framework starts by asking, why do we actually see an increase in the number of jobs and work being thriving, increasing in today's age? And the central insight, if there's one takeaway, we're going to expand upon this, is that just because a technology can replace a job, it almost never will actually do so. So another way to say it is, again, because a technology has the capability to replace a job, it doesn't mean it will. Instead, what the bounded automation framework is, just like, again, rationality is constrained by our ability to process information, automation is constrained by social, economic, and organizational influence that fundamentally shape the diffusion of digital technologies in the economy and occupation. So I know this is a little bit theoretical. I'm going to give you several examples. So the first one, just to illustrate this in a little bit. If you think about ebooks, electronic books, when they first came out, everyone said, physical print books are going to be gone by now. They're no longer going to be available. All of us will be using e-readers. Now, we do use e-readers, but if you look at, again, as a researcher, if you look at the actual data, the digitization of books has led to an increase in physical book sales. We've actually seen the number of physical book sales increase over time. There are a number of reasons for this. I'm not going to go in detail maybe in the Q&A, but one of the main reasons or one of the main observations that I just want to highlight here is that, again, just because the technology exists to replace all the books doesn't mean that it will. And so, this is one of the recent papers that illustrates this claim in more detail. One example that this paper gives for why we see this trend for books, because, I mean, as university students, you might be interested in this, is that you might be able to find some books electronically, but not all books are available through ebooks. And what this paper hypothesizes is that people, when they discover an author they like, they'll go and order more books from that author that aren't necessarily available. Similarly, I don't know, I won't ask you, but you can think about it. Like, when is the last time you gifted somebody an ebook? It's not a very nice gesture, generally speaking. If you want to gift somebody a book, generally you'll give them the physical copy, right? That has, again, nothing to do with the technological capability. It has to do with going back to the social norms, expectations, so on and so forth. Let me give you one other example that hopefully illustrates the main point very clearly. For several years, if not close to 2 decades now, the technology to automate flying, especially including commercial airplanes, has been in place. Yet similarly, we haven't seen an elimination or reduction in the pilots in an airplane. In fact, in the US, and my understanding is in most places in the world, we've seen an increase in their pay and a shortage of pilots that are needed, right? So it's again another example of a technology existing that can do everything a profession does, but we don't see decreases in employment or wages. So these are just some examples. Now I'm going to present the more detailed framework for how can you predict, how can we understand whether a technology is going to lead to increases in demand or decreases, so on and so forth. So there are 3 components of the bounded automation framework that I will explain and again give several examples. So one is called the pricing of labor. How much does a country pay, or a profession, pay the worker? So in this framework, lower wage workers, people who do not get paid a lot, are less likely to be automated. The reason is because in order to develop a technology to automate a profession, it has to be profitable for the investors, the developers, and maintaining the technology is very expensive as well. The more complex the technology is, the more expensive it is to maintain. There's no coincidence that the companies that are leading artificial intelligence development are generally the biggest, the companies that have the most money. Google, Apple, Amazon, they have a lot of money to develop these technologies. So the interesting thing here, if you just look at pricing of labor, a lot of times you think, oh, the janitors or the worker, sometimes in the US, service workers, retail workers, they are going to be automated. But with this framework, it says, no, actually, if you pay them very little, there's a very low chance they're going to get automated because it's cheaper to pay workers to do the job than to develop the technology to automate them and replace them. Make sense? So with that criteria, the higher the pay, the more likely it's going to attract automation. Okay? Just looking at that factor. Now, the second component is there are lots of terms that, at least to me, I think this is the simplest term. It's called professional power. How powerful is a profession in determining the way a technology is designed and used. So the classic example, I mean, you can correct, or in the Q&A, you can correct me if this works, at least in the US, are doctors, physicians. Nobody can tell them which technology to use. Often they will be the ones to determine which technology they're going to use in their profession. I'm going to show you some data about this in a second to substantiate this claim. But it's an example, right? So doctors generally will control, they control who becomes a doctor, to revoke a license, so on and so forth. Same with lawyers, accountants, in the US in particular. They have a lot of professional power. Versus sometimes, again in the US and other countries, truck drivers, other types of workers, they generally don't have a lot of professional power. If a technology comes to automate them, they can't say, oh no, we don't want to use it. I mean, it's going to be like, too bad. The employer, the organization will decide whether or not they can use the technology. Okay? The last one is, so just to be clear, generally speaking, a profession or an occupation that has a lot of power to control the technology is less likely to get automated, right? Because, so similar to, if we go back to pilots, generally speaking, they are involved in deciding how to use the technology, right? So if you think about pilots, again, all around the world, they have to undergo their normal training and learn how to use the new technology to automate flying. They're not using it to replace their training or change their training. They're using it to enhance, augment, increase their training. So the last one here is the nature of task. So generally speaking, the interesting thing about this framework is that, so yes, the more abstract, the more complex, the more creativity and imagination, the less likely it's going to be automated. But also, tasks that require you to respond in the moment. I hope this makes sense. Another way to say it is, we call it situational. So a security guard. You don't pay a security guard, generally speaking, or a police person for 90% of what they're doing. You're paying them to respond in case something bad happens. You can't tell them, oh, something bad is going to happen, in 1 week at 10 p.m. And then, yeah, you might be able to automate them, right? But generally speaking, any type of task that involves responding in the moment, in the situation, is less likely to get automated. So again, the classic example here also is janitors. When you spill a liquid, it could splash on the ceiling on this chair. It will take millions of examples, if not billions of examples in compute power, to teach an AI system to scan the entire hall and clean here and clean on the screen. Whereas a human, within a few seconds, can wipe the chair and wipe the screen. You don't need to tell them, scan the entire hall, find the right. So this is another example. You have to take in all three of these to determine how a technology is going to impact the profession. So one of the last main points I'm going to mention is that you have to take a weighted average of these factors. So if one factor shows that it's less likely to be automated, that could be enough to protect it from technology or to determine the effect that technology will have on the profession. So as I mentioned, if you look at pricing of labor, just to be clear, the higher the price, the more likely to get automated. On the professional power, the lower the professional power, the more likely to get automated. On the nature of the task, the more routine or predictable, the more likely it is to get automated. But now let's go back to the service worker or cashier example. The nature of their task is very routine. They don't have a lot of professional power, right? If you put in self-checkout line, they can't say we don't want you to do that. But their pricing of labor is very low. And so they're unlikely to get automated just because of that one factor, right? So you need to look at all three and then try to come up with a weighted average to determine how AI is going to affect the profession. Okay, so this is the example that I gave about physicians. So when I was at Stanford in around 2019 when I was leaving, most computer scientists were predicting that we're going to see a sharp decline in radiologists. The reason is because for decades, radiologists, their main job is to label images. And you can easily train an artificial intelligence system to, look at the labels and look at the images and use it to predict then and make radiologist diagnosis. But again, we have actually seen a increase in the number of job openings in pay for radiologists as well. Going back briefly to this framework, if you look at it here again, is that the pricing of labor would suggest that they could be replaced, that they should be replaced because they make a lot of money, and so it would save an organization to try to replace them. But as I mentioned, one, they have a lot of power in determining how the technology is going to develop, and second, what is happening with radiologists is that the technology works for routine cases, but it doesn't work very well for the more complex cases. Yeah, so they're spending more of their time on interesting or more difficult images that are there, right? So again, this is an example that hopefully illustrates the bounded automation framework. So another way to say the central insight of bounded automation and more broadly is that artificial intelligence and technology more broadly fundamentally reflects and amplifies our values and priorities, right? So going back to the airplane example, the technology exists to automate them, but as a profession, as a society, we have decided we still want them in the airplane in case something goes wrong, for lots of reasons, right? We still want them in the airplane. Now, I mean, it's possible our priorities and values will change in the future, but as it stands now, in the last 2 decades, we haven't seen a decrease, even though the technology exists, right? So again, a technology, generally speaking, its capabilities will not usually determine its effect on work. It's more of what we value and prioritize. Okay, so this is just another trivia question that I wanted to throw out. We can see, you can think about this, and I'll tell you some responses. What new technology since the 1900s has arguably had the biggest impact on work productivity? A lot of people will say the internet, smartphones, so on and so forth. But electricity was in the 1870s, so no, that's usually a response as well, but we're going to exclude that. No doubt electricity, but I specifically put since 1900. It turns out the answer to this is actually the air conditioner. The reason is is because it allowed expansion throughout the world. It allowed the development of skyscrapers. It allowed people to work in hot and cold weather, right? And the other thing, so you can be productive ideally the entire day, right? Not just in certain areas and certain times of the day. It also is attributed to significantly reducing infant and elderly mortality. Yeah. The other key point that I just want to highlight is that everyone can benefit from AC. You don't need an advanced degree to benefit from AC. What I'm trying to illustrate here is that the more complex the technology is, generally speaking, the more advanced education and degree you need to be able to realize its benefits. So again, I'm going to illustrate this with data as well. There's this, so professors, academics, we like to create measures. We like to create new statistics, right? This one is useful, I think. So there's a measure called total factor productivity. And I think this might be one of the last, about 5 minutes, right? So total factor productivity tries to isolate what impact does a technology have on the overall economy's productivity. So what impact does technology have on the overall productivity of an economy, okay? As opposed to education, as opposed to other types of any other factor, right? So take out all other factors. What effect does technology have on the overall economy's productivity? So you can see in 1950 to 1974 in the United States, it was about 2.21, okay? So this was in the United States when AC was proliferating, diffusing. Also manufacturing, right? It was the peak in the United States. Since then, we have yet to get even close to this level of productivity, of technology's contribution to productivity. The thing I want to highlight here is that this is high-speed internet, smartphones, so on and so forth. If you're curious, this is generally attributed to working from home when we saw this increase. There are lots of reasons, but a couple that I want to mention is that as it relates to internet and smartphones, some studies show that 90% of the time, people use it for leisure. Some of you here might also be browsing for leisure, hopefully not. And we may, or for fun, right? Just for like to watch sports, to listen to music. That might be good, but it doesn't contribute to an economy's productivity, right? So it's just to show you again that a lot of new technology, it hasn't necessarily contributed. And a couple of reasons are, whoops, hang on here. Let me put that back up. A lot of reasons are because it's again, the more complex the technology is, the longer it takes to diffuse and get implemented in a way that's going to overall affect our economy, right? So I'm gonna skip over this. One thing that I also just wanted to say in the last couple of minutes is that there's nothing inherently artificial or intelligent about AI, right? It relies on humans, right? It's been trained on books. It's been trained on what we have contributed. It takes a lot of energy, right? It takes a lot of water and resources to train and use artificial intelligence. We've seen this as well, that a lot of these systems have used humans to train artificial intelligence, right? So the point is that every technology, as I said, it fundamentally relies on humans and natural resources to create and train. The other thing with Gen AI, because I wanted to touch on that in the last few seconds I have, is that it's made generating text and images very easy. But what happens with a lot of technology, it shifts the work. So it's easier to generate, but now there's a lot more in verification, making sure it's accurate, making sure it's true, so on and so forth. I think I should probably stop there for now. Right? How are we doing with time, Gonzalo?
1 minute.
1 minute. I can just give you this example to talk about this shift. So, a couple of weeks ago, I was having an allergic reaction, and typed this into ChatGPT. I took a Claritin. I don't know if you have. It's essentially a allergy medicine to reduce the allergic reaction, and it didn't work. So I wanted to see if I could take a different one. And ChatGPT essentially said that yes, it's safe. You can take this. The answer it gave was very convincing. You know, it says this medication uses a different type of antihistamine, different class. Claritin is long-acting, non-sedating, which is true. Benadryl is short-acting histamine. Because they work differently, the body are not the same, taking them together can be an effective way to manage severe allergic reactions. But since I teach this, I'm like, wait, there's nothing inherently artificial or intelligent about AI systems. I checked, the first website I checked, which was Benadryl, and every other website I checked says, do not use multiple products. Especially, it's never safe to take multiple antihistamine medications, such as Benadryl or Claritin together, right? The reason is that ChatGPT and others, they don't understand your input like humans. They look at what you have, it creates a statistical probability and tries to return a result that is statistically probable. So one last illustration of this. These are all the advanced, the premium ChatGPT I'm giving you responses from. If you were to ask, what is the fifth word in the sentence, which I'm asking about, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 word. The fifth word in your sentence is B, right? The reason is because it doesn't understand, right? It's taking my text, creating a trying to see from its training data, what did I ask, and then return a result. But this specific question isn't in their training data, right? And another way to illustrate it, you can try it, well, if you want, you can try this and check. Ask it this question 3 times in a row. Generally speaking, it will give you 3 different answers. Yeah? All right. For now, we'll leave it there.
Ok, so the questions, o sea, las preguntas las podían hacer en español también. Veo, si quieren hacer todavía las pueden seguir haciendo, no hay problema. La mayoría como que entendió que era en inglés, pero se puede hacer en español, ¿ya? So thank you, Hatim, again for the excellent presentation. So one thing that I think most or several of the students are asking is related to the bounded automation framework. So my personal question is, who is the author of that? Is that a recent framework, or is something that has been around?
No, the last name of the author is Fleming. It's from 2017. So if you look up Fleming bounded automation, I'm actually working on a paper updated because it's good, but I think it's missing many things like country differences. Yeah. So I'm trying to write a paper that's a little bit more comprehensive. But that one comes from Fleming, I believe 2017, around then.
It's not Lee Fleming?
No, not Lee. It's a different Fleming.
So one thing that I thought it was very interesting is because the early studies of automation, they were usually saying the third dimension, like, is this routine enough that you can automate? And saying 60% or 70% of jobs are going to be replaced because they're so routine. But here in the other parts of the world, as you were saying, we're thinking about this, that's not cost effective. I mean, you're not going to replace here any of those jobs because they need to be more lucrative in order to do so. So they might be in the US, but not here.
Can I also give, I don't know if you have it here, in the US, they had, Amazon, you know, right? They tried to create a store called Amazon Go. I don't know if you heard about this. So what they did was they said, no cashiers. You can simply check out, take your But first of all, recently you can search. They're shutting that model down. What they had over 1,000 workers overseas monitoring every single thing somebody took off the shelf.
Yeah.
Right? Because it was cheaper to do that.
Right.
But now they realize that doing this is actually more costly than just having somebody in the store.
Okay.
So yeah, another example of that.
Yeah. So another thing was that very interesting. Another thing that was interesting is that so basically you say so some professions are more likely to be replaced depending on the power they have, or less likely to be replaced if they have more power. But some of the dimensions you were saying are like they have a negative correlation. I think the first two one except. So, do you think there are dimensions that are going in parallel? They have they go counter.
Yeah, I mean, so the point, the thing with about automation, one of the thoughts is, you have to look at each occupation to be able to determine. So one that often comes is truck drivers, right? Most tech companies have spent billions of dollars trying to figure out how to automate truck drivers. Now, if we use that framework, right? So the pricing of labor, it's attractive, right? I don't know, in the US, you pay them like a good amount, more than like, not a lot, but enough to attract development and technology. At the same time, they have a lot of clout in the US in terms of politics, right? Meaning that they can shut down the entire highway. They can ask politicians on their behalf to rally for them. And it's become now in the US, a political issue.
Yeah. So you were saying the highest paid are more likely to be automated, the less powered, and the more routine. That's what I understand.
Say it one more time.
The one that the most pay,
yes,
most likely to be automated, right?
From that factor, yeah, looking at pricing of labor.
And so there was another question by a student, and he was asking do you see AI progressing enough as to overcome power of the professional, like the AI being so powerful that overcomes the power of the actual profession?
Not in our lifetime. I don't see it happening. And in the example I give as well is on this autonomous driving. Almost every company that I know is decreasing their investments in reaching fully autonomous driving because of how complicated it is. So AI, generally speaking, is a complex technology, especially compared to the air conditioner, right? And the more complex technology, the harder it is to maintain, the harder it is to develop and scale. So let me just give one way. So in the United States, we have this airline called Southwest Airlines. Yeah. I don't know what the equivalent is over here. But
I don't think they come here.
Yeah. They are using scheduling software from the late 90s, early 2000s. And the reason is because the more complicated technology, there is better scheduling software out there, but it just takes so much time and retraining to get people to use this more advanced scheduling software.
So some of the questions were related to the last slide you had when you were discussing, is this technology actually making us more productive? And this is related, I don't know if you know Robert Gordon, the economist.
Yeah. Exactly. It's from, yep.
So he was saying like the physical technologies were actually induce more productivity than the software-based ones.
Yes,
in the later times.
Yep.
So are you agree with that, or do you think it's...
Yeah, this is inspired by Robert Gordon, who is a professor at Northwestern. I first learned about it from his research as well. I am agreeing with him. Correct.
So there is a question by Jorge Lankington. Basically, he's asking, what do you think social media is decremental to productivity, or does it have any other way around in which it's actually making us more productive?
So social media is a great example, and again, I had a couple more slides, but for almost every technology, and social media is a good example of this. Usually, both the best and worst happen at the same time. So with social media, the best as it relates to productivity is that we can we can ask the crowd for answers. People all around the world can post experience, but at the same time, the worst is happening, and that people can post misinformation. They can post things that are untrue, and they could go viral as well. So overall, we have not seen it increase productivity. I think it's because you have the best and worst cancel each other out, right? You get productivity, but then you get all the people have to verify. You get the misinformation, and you have to have people debunk misinformation. So,
so there is another question by Benjamin Thompson. Well, basically, he's asking do you think that automation is going to be the new professionals that are being formed right now, the undergrads that are going to school, like the ones we have here, that are living this era in which we have the AI support and etc. Do you think they are going to be less competent, less productive in the end because of AI?
Let me quickly go to this slide here. Sorry, 1 second. I think what you're getting at a little bit is this trade-off, this automation and de-skilling trade-off. Anytime a technology automates what you do, it does lead to de-skilling. So you lose skills. So the example that I give, at least in the United States, is that we have washing machines. Very few people today know how to wash clothes by hand. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but we lost that skill. So to answer the question directly, if you are going to use automation to write your essays, don't do that. But let's just say an example. Let's just say hypothetically a student uses it. You are going to lose your skill to do that. Now, does it matter or not? That's going to depend on what you're doing. We've seen, for example, for lawyers, for physicians, so on and so forth, it does matter, right, if you do. And going back to pilots, right, they've determined that they don't want to lose the skills for how to manually fly a plane, land a plane, so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's interesting how you say that we sort of decide that, which part of what things can be automated and which not. Do we try sort that or
another illustration of this is in math. Calculators have existed for decades. So we have kids. Last we checked, our teachers are teaching them how to add and subtract by hand, right? Still. Because we found that there's value in having those skills and reasoning, even though you don't need to.
So there is another question by, sorry, I was thinking, yeah, okay. So Randall Bierman, he's asking if, because, well, his question is, do you think any job is going to be replaced in the future? Because you have this slide showing that only elevator operator, but maybe not even an elevator operator. And also you had this prediction saying radiologists are going to be replaced because we have this new image technology, image analyzing technology. But actually they got into doing other things, more complicated, more sophisticated. So it gives the impression that none of our jobs are going to be replaced. Do you think is that true? Do you see one being likely to be replaced?
It's a good question. So again, I don't think we're going to see an elimination, but we are going to see a change in the composition of demand. So an example that I'll give is journalists. Hopefully, I don't know if they're, but we've seen across the world, there have been layoffs of journalists. They haven't disappeared, but partly because now you can use technology to do, although, I mean, it's arguable, but using the bot automation framework, journalists are paid a lot of money. Not all of them have a lot of powerful relations, especially around the world. And what they do, some of journalists summarizing what happened can be automated, right? So you would predict some types of journalists, we're going to see a decrease in their demand. Whereas other ones that require lots of investigation, so journalists that summarize events, decrease in demand. Journalists that require lots of investigation, lots of talking to people, piecing together, increase in those types of journalists.
Okay, so there are three highly voted questions. I don't think we have time for the three, but I can pick one. So, and there are like extensions of what you were saying, okay? So, do you see artificial intelligence impacting socioeconomic differences among different groups or even geographic regions of the world?
Yeah, so the research shows most clearly that if you have a college degree, generally you'll be okay. You'll do well because you can adapt. You have good networks, good professors that you can talk to. People who don't have a college degree struggle the most. That's the general heuristic, a general rule of thumb that research has shown.
Okay, so thank you so much, Hatim, for participating in our class. Do you want to show something?
No, yeah. If you want to connect on LinkedIn, feel free. I'd love to talk to you. Or if you visit United States, Chicago, please reach out. We can have some more discussion.
Thank you for inviting us to Chicago, Hatim. Hopefully we'll not go all together and only one by one. But thank you. Yeah. Thank you again. So, le damos un aplauso al profesor Hatim. Gracias a todos ustedes por las preguntas. Thank you so much for your questions. Me siento como Don Francisco hablando en los dos idiomas. Yeah. Sorry, a selfie. Gracias de nuevo, que les vaya bien.